Good evening, and I hope you're doing well. Welcome to our session today, and I hope everyone had a really lovely week. It's been quite hectic for me, especially today. So this is the second evening session that we're having. We had one early on in the evening, but I sent a message to everyone in the cohort to ask when if it would be preferable for you to have a late session or an early one, and you all had responded that late is preferable to keep with what we've been doing. So yeah, welcome, and hope everyone is doing good. We will record the session, and so if anyone is late, they can catch up with the recording. I think that's just the best way to go, because we're going to have a very in-depth session this time, and I want to be sure that we're not wasting time. So you can always catch up with the recording. I'll be sure to share. So yeah, let's start. What's our session for today? It is gender equality and MEL. MEL being monitoring, evaluation, and learning. And why gender equality and MEL? It's because tomorrow, 8th of March, is our International Women's Day celebration. So this is EAI and TLHub's consideration for International Women's Day. And that being said, I'll go into our introduction, even though I know you all know EAI, but I'm required to do it. So funny thing is that EAI's registration was finalized on the 8th of March a long time ago. So International Women's Day is quite significant for the consultancy firm. And I volunteer at the faculty of the Learning Hub, which is the Training Academy of Evidence Analytics and Insights. Those of us who are faculty members, we use the Learning Hub to support professionals in the social development sector with the skills, the tools, and the knowledge that they need to do their jobs better and to thrive at work. And the focal areas that we're in are monitoring and evaluation, program design, program implementation, and we have very recently in 2025 veered into communications for development, as you all know, being that you are members of the pilot cohort for our communications for development course. So I know that there are different professionals in the cohort. There are people who are program implementers, there are people who are grants, but they work with bidding. There are those who are evaluators and MEL practitioners. So it's a huge mix. But what we're going to be looking at today are the definitions. So if you've never understood all the words that I said in development space around gender, you're going to understand them today. We're also going to be looking at the benefits of ensuring gender equality in our programming and what a good program that has gender equality embedded looks like. Then we'll delve into gender, why bringing in those gender perspectives into our monitoring and evaluation work is important. We're going to look at indicators, which is a thing that people usually have issues with when it comes to designing evaluation frameworks. How do you couch indicators that relate to gender? Then we'll look at our work methodologies when you're looking at the design of an evaluation or a monitoring process, and then our approaches for data collection. Then you will have the opportunity to ask any questions. Okay. I know you know me, but do I need to do an introduction? Well, my name is Fadare, and I'm an evaluation specialist who has worked very well across most of sub-Saharan Africa. I've also worked for projects in South Asia, in the UK, and I've worked for organizations in the US. So yeah, a lot of experience when it comes to MEL, and I'll be sharing that, my understanding of how we can look at this gender equality thing, gender mainstreaming in our programming and in our work today. So what is gender equality and why is it important? I think another question is why women? Why does gender equal to women? So it doesn't. Gender does not equal to women. I think we should define some of these words that are couched in these terms that we may not understand. So we'll look at definitions before we look at what gender equality is. Look at definitions like what gender itself is, what gender norms are, what it means when we're saying gender equity. That one, sometimes it confuses me myself. Gender mainstreaming and empowerment. So the first one is, what is gender? Gender refers to the societies, that's it, the societies, the generality of people in a population, what they consider appropriate for an individual based on the person's sex. Okay, so gender is not sex. Sex are the physical, physiological, biological attributes that an individual has based on their makeup. So based on whether you are XX or XY, how do you look? How do you function biologically? How do you look physically? That is sex. Okay. In the previous class, in the previous webinar that was held earlier on, I sort of confused them. I was like, which one is it? Is it XY that is female or XX that is male? Which one is it? So put it in the comments what you think. I know that it is XY for male and XX for female. But yeah, put it in the comment which is the sex. But when we talk of gender, always remember that we're looking at what society considers to be appropriate for individuals based on their perceived sex. And that's what society considers to be appropriate relates to social expression. How are you supposed to behave socially? What are the cultural expectations of individuals? And what behaviors are associated with the different genders? So that is the definition. And in this definition, I know that society itself has evolved beyond male and female. But for the sessions that we're going to be having on this topic, we're going to look at the traditional male and female genders and not any others. So that's where we're going to go into. Next thing is gender norms. When we say gender norms, what do we mean? So again, it's what society has constructed as its expectations and the behaviors that are appropriate for an individual based on their gender. So based on your gender, remember gender is based on your sex. Now, based on your gender, what is appropriate? How should you behave? How are you expected to talk, sit, to earn an income? What are those expectations? Those are gender norms. And these gender norms, they dictate a lot about people's lives and the eventual individual outcomes that they can aspire to. So gender norms have a strong effect on an individual's perceived gender identity, their choices, and social roles or societal roles. And they affect things like your roles and responsibilities. So the expectations for men versus women around work, most of the time men are expected to be the primary income earners. So behaviors in the family, the expectations around who should be the primary caregiver in the family. Leadership, labor, there are some expectations. There's sometimes when people say, that is not a woman's job. Don't do it. Women can't do that. Or, that thing you're carrying is too heavy. Look for a man to carry it for you, Or a man may be helping. Even I have said it, that's the societal expectation. A man taking care of a child is seen as him helping his wife, whereas he's taking care of his child. So those are societal rules and responsibility that a man is not expected to be the primary caregiver. A woman is, because she's the female gender. So yeah, those are the roles and responsibilities that affect us because they have been imposed on us by society. Another thing that gender norms affect are our behaviors and our attitudes. So how should we express our emotions? How do we behave when we're sad? How do we behave when we're happy? There's a different expectation on behavior related to emotions for men versus for women. It's not okay for a man to cry. It's not okay for a man to show weakness in his behavior, whereas it is acceptable for a woman to cry, for a woman to be soft, for a woman to be calm. Man is more expected to be more exuberant, to be out there, So our behaviors and our attitudes, how we conduct ourselves, how we respond in social situations, they are there are norms that are expected of us based on our gender. Now, appearance and dress, there are particular norms that are related to the clothing that we wear, how we groom ourselves, how we present ourselves. And if we do not conform to these norms, we're seen as behaving in a way or appearing in a way that is unacceptable or inappropriate. So for instance, in some societies, it's expected that women are supposed to dress in skirts, in dresses, and not in trousers or boxy clothes. So when a woman dresses up in a dress or skirt, she's seen as feminine, she's seen as representing her gender well. But when she doesn't, she wears a boxy jacket and trousers, she's seen as masculine. So it may not, in some societies, it may not be considered as appropriate. And these norms, even though they vary across cultures, one thing is certain is that they are reinforced by our social institutions like family, our schools reinforce them, the media, religion reinforce these gender norms, and they can influence our opportunities. So the opportunities that you get as an individual may be different if you are male than if you are female. How we access resources, they could influence so many things about our lives and our outcomes. And sometimes those influences may not be inclusive. It may mean that some genders are cut off because of a particular way that society expects that gender to behave. So yeah. So talking about gender is not women. Gender is not women. I hope we have clarified on that. Gender could be male or female. So you have the male gender, you have the female gender. And there are norms that are ascribed to either of the genders. Now, the next definition we're going to look at is gender equity. When we say gender equity, what do we mean? We refer to treatment of individuals according to their needs. Okay? So it's very, very different from equality. Gender equity is very, very different from equality. I'm still going to go into equality. When we say gender equity, it means that we're providing the resources or the opportunities that a particular gender needs to address their needs. Usually you would see there's this popular picture that shows gender equality. It's of two children or two people at a fence. And one is tall and can see into the area beyond the fence, but the other is short and can't. So gender equity is considered to be support provided to that individual who is short and who can see past the fence. So you bring a box and that person stands on it, and the person now becomes the height of the other fellow who is already tall and both can now see beyond the fence. So there was a problem for just one person who could not see beyond the fence, and then a particular resource was brought on board to assist that person to match the status of the person who could see. So that's equity. Equity is focusing on needs, on particular things, and providing the resources to address them. It's very, very different from equality. Okay. The next thing we're going to look at, the next development space terminology, is gender mainstreaming. For a long time, even I had a problem with understanding what gender mainstreaming is. Like, what do you mean when you are mainstreaming gender? What does that mean? Well, it is the process of making an assessment of the implications of any phenomena on a particular gender. So if you're going to have any kind of activity, what would be the implication of that activity on a gender? And then putting in processes to address those implications. So for instance, legislation, maybe a particular legislation that if you put it out, it may affect women differently from men. And you want to make sure that that does not happen, that if there's any different experience of that legislation, you reduce the negative consequences as much as possible. So same thing for programs. When you're mainstreaming a program, it means that you're doing an assessment of the implications of a particular intervention within your program, and you are making sure that you are limiting any negative effects that may have. In the workplace, it's the same thing. When you're mainstreaming gender in the workplace, you're making sure that particular things that may affect one gender different from the other are identified, and then you build in processes or systems to make sure that those negative consequences are not experienced. I'm not sure if I should define gender disparity now. I won't, but I think we've gone through quite a lot of the gender definitions that may confuse an individual when you're talking of gender, because we say these words a lot in development space, and it can be quite overwhelming to understand exactly what is going on. So now that we understand what gender is, what gender norms are, gender equity and gender mainstreaming, let's look at gender equality, which has been on, so I'm sure everybody has already read it. But when we say gender equality, we're speaking about everything being equal, rights, responsibilities, and opportunities. It's equal regardless of an individual's gender. Okay, so if, for instance, we look at education, we're saying that male and female have the exact same right to education. We're saying that if the government has said that for you to access education at the primary school level, you need a birth certificate and you need an immunization certificate, regardless of your gender, nobody is going to keep you from going to school and sitting down in the classroom and being taught very well. Neither your family, nobody in your family will say, she's a girl, she can't go now. Or she's a girl, before she goes, she has to tidy up the kitchen. Nobody's going to say that. You can go on time, you can access, and you can utilize the benefits of education. No teacher will say, oh, not my class, girls don't answer questions, okay? We're also looking at responsibilities. When we're looking at gender equality, we're saying that responsibilities should be equal regardless of gender, and same thing, opportunities should be equal regardless of gender. Let's give an instance of workplace opportunities. Sometimes you apply for a job as a female and you have the exact same qualifications, the exact same experience as a man, and you even outshine, because you are speaking really well at the interview, you outshine the man. But the panel that is doing that interview will sit down and say, this woman is very good, the man is equally very good. We have to make a decision between these two candidates. And they use their gender to be the factor that they use to decide on who they pick. That shows that there isn't equality in that setting. So it shouldn't be. It should be based on other things. So both of you have the same experience, you have the same educational background. Then there should be additional criteria that are put in place to do a structured assessment of the individuals, not the gender. Not someone on the panel saying, let's pick the man, Jerry. You know, we will hire this woman now. Next thing, within a year, she will say she's going on maternity leave. Who will do her job for her? It happens a lot. So that is inequality in opportunities. You could also have a situation where male and female, you hire two people, male and female, with the same experience, with the same qualifications, and they're expected to perform the same kind of role. And somehow the man's salary is higher than the woman's salary. The woman doesn't have access to that economic opportunity that the man has. Considerations may be that the man negotiated better, or the assumption is that, oh, this man probably has a family that is dependent on him. He's a primary earner. Please make sure that he has a very good pay so that nobody at home is disturbing him. So opportunities sometimes are not equal. And gender equality refers to bridging that gap and making sure that regardless of your gender, you have access to opportunities same as the other gender. Also, responsibilities. I've spoken about how gender norms impose particular responsibilities on women that are not imposed on men. So, for instance, the responsibility to provide care within the family usually sits sits on the woman and not on the man. And sometimes it can be a huge burden. These roles and these expectations come a long way. They come from a time when society had not evolved till now. So, for instance, if a man was a farmer and he was going to the farm to work and he would harvest and bring home, his wife or the women at home will be responsible for cooking that food, making sure everybody is eating right and taking care of the home. So the responsibility for caring for the home in those days rested on the woman. Time has changed now. And most of the time, a lot of men and women in the family unit go out to work. And then only one person within that family unit has the additional responsibility for caring for the home. It can be a lot that one person has to go to work, earn an income, come back to the home, and whereas there are two in the home, one person bears the sole responsibility of caring for the rest of the home. When you look at just the exertion that is needed, it can be a lot on the individual. So sometimes equality, making sure that, okay, we're both working, we're both going out of the home, we're both trying to earn an income. When we come back home, we would try to share the responsibilities in the home so that one person is not more overwhelmed than the other in carrying out those responsibilities. So that's what gender equality looks at. We talk about equal rights, talk about equal opportunities and equal responsibilities for genders, individuals, regardless of what kind of gender they fall under. And when we're looking at gender equality, we're saying that the needs, like I just said, you are going to work, you're coming back home, and you have to do house chores, you have to take care of kids, you have to help with homework. The needs, the exertion is more than someone who just goes to work, comes back, and can chill, have some downtime, watch some TV, hang out with friends. The needs are a lot on the person who is working and providing care as compared to the person who is just working. So with gender equality, we consider needs, we consider the interest of both men and women. And again, I'm using women as the example. I've been using women as the example, but it's not just about women. It's also about men. There are examples, we can use examples around accessing care. Sometimes men don't have the same opportunity to access care as women do. Healthcare is what I mean. And it comes from that primary thing of the hospital building, accessing the hospital building. Women are more likely than men to access the hospital building because the reproductive organs of a woman require her to have a child, for instance, and birthing is usually done in the hospital. So in a person who has been generally healthy for her adult life or for his or her adult life, the first time that individual would be required to really access medical care is usually the adult female who is pregnant. That person would need to go into the hospital and get checked, prenatal checks and all that. And subsequently, that person goes through all of antenatal, has the delivery, and now begins to take children to the hospital for their care. So the person that is more likely, again, because of gender norms, that person is responsible for caring. So women are more likely to access the health facility. It also means that women are more comfortable with the health facility. And when they feel ill, they are happy to go there, to go and get themselves checked. But for the man, a healthy male, most of his adult life has not had anything to do with the hospital. And is sometimes even a bit worried, what am I going to do in the hospital? So a man has a fever and is more likely to not access healthcare. And so you'll find out that A lot of chronic illnesses are experienced by men. Some of it is because of that simple thing of accessing a building and not knowing on time that you have a condition. So those are ways that men, the male gender, do not have access to opportunities. And sometimes even the responsibilities that we place on men. So driving, for instance, a lot of the time, the responsibility for driving falls on the men. And you see a lot of women who are passenger princesses. And when you look at public health information around road traffic accidents, you find out that most of the time men are involved in road traffic accidents at a higher rate than women are. And this makes people to assume that men are bad drivers, because how are you getting into accidents maybe 5 times more likely than women are likely to get into those accidents. And the truth is, it is because of the gender norms that have been ascribed to men that they are drivers and women are passengers. Not all women, but generally across society, you find that men drive more than women. So the data will tell us that, oh, men are worse drivers than women, but whereas that's not it. It's the fact that the population of men who are driving are more than the population, or is more than the population of women driving. So gender equality is trying to look for that balance, the equal rights, responsibility, and opportunities, and to consider things from the point of view of, oh, what's the core interest for this gender? What's the core need for this gender? And why is it important for us to consider gender equality? And why is it that gender equality is almost equal to women? Why? Why? To women equality. Why is it that when we say gender, anything gender in the development space, it's almost like we're referring to women. So yeah, let's quickly look at that. Excuse me. Did we define gender disparity? We did not. So maybe we should quickly define gender disparity before we look at how gender norms contribute to gender gender disparity. Once it's not gender equality, it's gender disparity. Once one particular gender does not have that access to equal rights, equal opportunities, or equal responsibilities because of their gender, not because of any other reason, just because you are male, some things are limited to you, then you are experiencing gender disparity. If because you are female, you are experiencing some things negatively, some things some responsibilities that you would like to take up, you're being limited from taking up those responsibilities, then you are experiencing gender disparity. So gender disparity oftentimes happens because of gender norms, because society has evolved from where we started off, but our norms are still the same. So sometimes the genders suffer. One way is role restriction. I've spoken about driving, and basically role restriction is when gender norms dictate that a specific role is for men or a specific role is for women. So you must conform. If you're seen stepping out of those roles, everybody looks at you like, what's going on with you? How dare you? And like I said, these are often really traditional perspectives, and society has evolved beyond these traditional approaches. So maintaining gender roles, oftentimes they confine individuals. They limit the choices that individuals have and the opportunities that they can access. So let's give an example. I won't use that. I think I've used older women for quite some time. Let's look at the younger population, girls and boys. Now, the operations in a home, there's what I call the domestic operations around cooking, cleaning, etc., etc. That responsibility for domestic operations usually is ascribed to the females in the home, and based on age, it will usually be the younger females. So let's look at the day of a young girl. She wakes up in the morning, she has to sweep, she has to have her bath, and then prepare for school. She eats her breakfast, she has to wash dishes, and then she has to go to school. She comes back from school, she supports the mom or auntie or whoever the primary caregiver is to make lunch. After lunch, she tidies up the kitchen, and by the time she's even done doing that, it's time to start preparing dinner, and it's bedtime. Yeah, after dinner, we clear the kitchen and it's bedtime. For boys, it's a bit different. There's very little expectation for boys to clean, to wash dishes. So a boy will wake up, have his bath, and he's off to school. He's ready to go to school. So imagine that he has to walk to a neighborhood school. Once he has finished eating his breakfast, my guy has gone. And he performs in school, comes back home. They call him to come and eat his lunch. While they are making lunch, he's probably playing his ball outside. After lunch, he decides to do his homework and uses the time between lunch and dinner, finish up schoolwork, play a bit more, have dinner, and go to bed. So you can see that there's a time disadvantage because of the role that has been ascribed to the girl child. That girl child will probably go to school later than her brother and will have less time to study after school or do her homework than her brother does. So that's how roles restrict genders and limit opportunities. We also see it, I think I've spoken about career advancement and opportunities in that sense. So yeah, role restriction and how gender norms contribute to it. So there's gender disparity in that role that the example I've just given, and it's the gender norms that are causing the disparity. The gender norms, the expectation that the girl will cook, the girl will clean, and the boy, no, you're not responsible for this. You just go and sort yourself out. So disparity due to gender norms. Another one is discriminatory practices. So these are when, because of our gender norms, one gender is favored over the other. Like I mentioned, in the hiring process, in promotions, and in pay. So I think it's accepted that the bias against women in the workplace is quite obvious in comparison to their male counterparts. Sometimes they're viewed as less competent. Even if they are strongly competent, if there's a male that is in the room, he will just be automatically thought to be more competent than the women. Women are also considered to be less dedicated because the people are thinking, oh, the dedication should be at home, not in the workplace, because of the caregiving aspect of their gender. So this would lead to wage gaps sometimes you can understand the perspective of the bosses or those in authority that if this woman is going to be gone for maternity leave, why am I paying her as much as the man who is going to be present all the time? But regardless, the woman didn't ask for her to be the one that has the function for producing milk. And that did she ask for her to be the one that has the function to grow the child in the womb, the uterus. So we must be sensitive to not allow the expectations of the gender to limit that gender and provide as much support to that gender as possible when we notice that there are issues. So gender disparity can also cause limited access to education and resources. I think I've explained that. I will not go over that, except to say that when the foundation for one's education has limitations, it has really long-term effects. If, for instance, a teacher in a classroom is focused on the boys in the class and doesn't support girls to learn, then those girls are at a disadvantage. They would always perform poorly in that class. And because they have performed poorly in that class, the things they need to know, they don't know it. And there's no time to get it back because the next class is another thing. So you are going to be in that deficiency for a long time, which will further limit your opportunities. So imagine that you don't know what you are expected to know. And in a job interview, they're asking you about those things. You are going to perform poorly in that job interview. And the opportunities that you have will be limited because you actually do not know. So these things have long-term effects on the individual's self-actualization. And that's what causes gender disparity, because this limited education will also lead to wage differences or wage gaps. So yeah, a conundrum that is not oftentimes easy to speak about. Now, violence and harassment. I've spoken mainly about situations that affect women. violence and harassment affects everybody. Sometimes women beat on men, but the statistics show that women are more likely to experience gender-based violence or sexual harassment than the male folk. It's established, and it limits our ability to participate fully in society because there's the limitation on the individual, the fear, the self-doubt that comes with experiencing violence and harassment. We attribute that to poor management of power within relationships. You can see the next one is influence of power dynamics. A lot of the time, the violence and harassment that are experienced by a particular gender are due to the power dynamics of one gender being perceived to be stronger or perceiving themselves to be stronger, and so that they can do as they like without any accountability. So yeah, in a traditional society, you find out that patriarchal structures are upheld and men are considered to be the ones that are in charge. They have more power, they have more authority, and it's oftentimes can influence even decision making. That a decision that it would be good if, sorry, excuse me, it would be good if the perspectives of both genders are considered. Because of the power dynamics at play, only one gender will be allowed to speak, only one gender's perspective will actually be held. So you would have inequalities being unaddressed because that consideration for a level playing field is not there. You're just looking at one gender in decision making. It also, this issue of influence of power dynamics also limits women's participation in things like governance and leadership, decision-making roles, because nobody's going to even consider you to assign you a role that relates to power. Case in point is our legislative system. If you look at it, you'll find out that we have more males than females. And sometimes you wonder if they really consider how policies affect the female population in society, or if it's just the one approach fits all. Yeah, there are many things there are many places where we see gender disparity, but hopefully the work that we do helps to balance things out eventually. There's also the restriction of expression, where people cannot express themselves because they are a particular gender, and it can be really, really very sad. Let me give an instance. Voice is quite important in particular sectors. So for instance, in the art space, the expression, so if you are a musician, for instance, having that belief that you are not looked down on because your gender is in this more open, more extroverted profession, can be a challenge. So you may be restricted in how you express yourself musically as a woman as compared to a man. The opportunities are then limited for the female gender compared to the male. And the last one is economic disparities. I think I've spoken about that when I was looking at the wage thing and the educational access, and how lack of educational access at the foundational stage can actually influence the economic, what an individual earns in adulthood. So you'll see that there are disparities in wages between both genders, and these have negative effects of a lot of those of the gender that is affected looking for transactional opportunities to match up the difference in their economies, and sometimes those transactional opportunities lead to really, really negative consequences for them. So yeah, generally these gender norms, like I said, they help us to shape our behaviors, attitudes, and the way we look at life, and they can contribute to gender disparity because they were not bad in their original form. It's just that we no longer exist in that traditional society that requires these gender norms to be maintained. And we need to evolve as our society has evolved. And social development programs really help us to evolve as a society when we look at the approach that we use. And if you consider gender equality in your programming, you find out that you are contributing. As social development practitioners, we contribute a lot to making sure that the world is more equitable. Like equality is really, really a focus of a lot of projects. When you're bringing that gender equality thinking into your work, you find that there's this holistic development in society. Our work focuses on improving health outcomes, improving education outcomes, and economic outcomes for individuals. And most of the time, we hone in and say, where is the deficiency and how can we address it? When we're doing that, we find out that every individual, regardless of gender, is able to meet their potential. And so there's holistic development. Also, our work, a lot of us work on projects that address social injustice. So we contribute to making sure that that power imbalance that I spoke about are addressed, that there's less discrimination, and that as much as possible on the work that we do, society is fair and balanced. People have the same opportunities to thrive. And kudos to everyone who is working on this kind of project. Now, a consideration for gender equality helps us to be more effective in the projects that we deliver. So if, for instance, we're trying to identify what specific gaps exist in the communities that we're serving, then we can address them and we can be more impactful than using a blanket approach for everyone. And our work also informs policy. A lot of us MEL practitioners, we help to develop project reports, we help to develop briefs, we do presentations, we go to conferences where we're speaking about the effect of our work, and we're informing policy making to go in the right approach, making sure that there's equitable resource allocation across both genders and that there are systems that support both genders. But again, this is like what's that word? The utopia, if you're doing things the right way. So I have a slight, not a poll, but put in the chat box where your program is at in this whole lovely world that we're trying to build as development practitioners. So project gender unaware, gender neutral, gender sensitive, or gender transformative. I'll take us through and then just pop in the chat box where you find your program. Now, when we say gender unaware, what do we mean? We mean the project does not care. The project is not aware. They're not thinking about gender differences. They're not thinking about inequalities. They're just implementing. So bandwagon effect. If it touches you and helps your life, good for you. If it doesn't, oops, sorry. So yeah, you do have projects like that that don't consider any gender differences or inequalities. We also have projects that are called gender neutral. So they do understand that there are imbalances between the genders, but they are not going to particularly address any disparities that they have observed. And they could have their own reason for why they haven't included gender in their intervention. Oftentimes, it could be resources that they do not have the resource to delve deep and create interventions that address the needs or the barriers that a particular gender suffers or experiences. Other times, it could be that they may have the funding, but because of a particular effect that focusing on one gender may have, they decide not to because it's a risk to the project. An instance is a project on, like I've used this example before. I keep using this example. You people are tired of hearing this example, but I know I've used it for this particular cohort. There was one time in the East, there was an agricultural project, oil palm, for economic empowerment, and the women were thriving. They were making mad money from this project, and they were facing harassment in their homes and gender-based violence because this is new wealth to them, and they got home, they weren't sharing with their husbands, and the husbands felt, based on their gender roles or their gender norms, that they had a right over the income that these women were making. And when the women didn't submit their income to their husbands, all hell broke loose. Some people got fists in their faces, slaps, and all that. And the project had to rethink their approach. So that kind of project would benefit from being gender neutral. invite both men, if considering that the men in that society were not used to their women having that empowerment. It would have been good if everybody was brought on board. And then interventions were designed specifically for the genders. So the women may still be in that project, the ones who have the economic empowerment, but there could be an intervention for the men on how to support or manage their spouses who are in the project so that the income of those spouses are well used. There could also be an intervention focused on the women on how to manage possible risks that they would be exposed to as the bigger or as an income earner, considering that they were not before. So some projects may need to be gender neutral and look at interventions for both genders to make sure that risks that have been identified for that project do not see the light of day. Now, your project could also be gender sensitive. So if you do recognize that women and men have different roles, different needs, and different statuses in society, and you build your interventions to meet these different roles and gaps, then you are gender sensitive. If you're very aware. And then gender transformative. Gender transformative programs are the ones that try to do a structured analysis of what is causing the imbalance, what is causing the inequalities between the genders, and they design an intervention to address that particular gap that has been identified. So yeah, let's see. We'll look at it later, what everyone is saying to save on time. We'll look at what everyone is saying on if their project is gender aware, gender sensitive, gender neutral, or gender transformative. But you can see what we're looking at, that our programs, most of the time, have some gender considerations in them. Most programs are designed to have some sort of consideration for gender. Some projects are purely transformative projects. They're looking at girl-child education. They're looking at female empowerment. They're looking at financial literacy for women. Those are gender transformative projects. And I've been on quite a few, and I've enjoyed working on those kind of projects at every time, because you see that you are helping people to level up and to become that sufficiency, that feeling of self-actualization, that they can achieve things on their own for their lives. It's a really good kind of project to work on. So yeah, now that we've looked at projects, let's go into monitoring and evaluation, as well as learning and gender perspectives for evaluations. It is very, very, very important that as evaluators, we consider gender in our work. One is for equity and inclusion. I've given the example of the imbalance that a particular gender could face. When we as evaluators bring on our evaluation hat, our job is to provide insights. We're supposed to be the light that is shining on the hidden data in the project. So we are the ones that can help to identify where there are gaps. So, but if you are not thinking from the point of equity, from the point of gender, you won't be able to identify it. If you do not want to include, so if you just want things to remain as they are, you're not particularly saying, oh, let's be more inclusive, we would have a problem with our evaluations. So it's important that as evaluators, we consider equity and inclusion and the needs and experiences of all genders. If there's something you're doing, look at your numbers, dig deep, and try to identify where there are issues that each gender is facing, and help your team to understand that, provide the support that they need to address it also. Gender perspectives are very, very important in impact assessment, because our evaluations can show where there are differences between the genders and provide that understanding of, this is why you're not making impact. Or if you do XYZ, this is where you are going to make impact, because this is where it's going to affect the gender. Okay. So we should be having that consideration when we're doing assessments, that, oh, what are we really assessing? What are we looking for? Do we have the right indicators that are measuring how impactful this project has been on the genders? Recently, I was in a conversation where someone was complaining about a project and saying that they only have gender disaggregated data. There are no indicators that relate to gender. And I raised up my hand and said, yeah, it's okay to have just gender disaggregated data, especially if it's not a gender transformative project. You can't have just gender disaggregated data. But when you are doing your analysis, pull out that subset, the male gender, pull it out and look at your data points and investigate how it affects male as compared to female. Pull out your data sets for female and look at how it affects female as compared to male. And even within the data set, investigate further, investigate age groups, investigate contextual factors, investigate whatever key phenomena your project is trying to address within that subset of data. So it's not just to report we had 10 men and 40 women. So women were overly represented, we've achieved our target. Amongst those 40 women that you have, investigate deep. Within the 10 men that you have, investigate deep, and you'll be able to really determine how impactful your project was for the different genders. Also, when we're looking at gender perspectives, we're able to see if our project is very effective or not. So there may be gender-related barriers that one particular gender is facing that the other is not. If we're not looking at our project data very well, we won't be able to identify, and we'll be able to help the project team to identify the right strategy that they need to address that issue. I'll give an example. I was working on a project. This was an empowerment project. I think it was a business acceleration project for young people in Ghana. And part of the acceleration was, part of the project was you had to do incubation. I think you had to do incubation before you had to do acceleration. And the incubation phase had to do with training. And the training was a 4-hour training, I think 3 times in a week from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Very simple and straightforward. Part of that training, the data that was collected was attendance registers, and then there was a pre-test and a post-test. Now, the MEL manager on that project was looking at attendance and just observed that. And that's why it's important to have the disaggregated data and to look at what's happening within the subset. So the MEL manager observed that the females within the females data set, there was a lot of late coming, severe late coming, not 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes late coming. People were coming 2 hours after the project training had started. And this MEL manager felt it was very absurd and decided to ask questions around why the females were coming late. And the guy found out that the females were still taking care of their homes in that early morning time. So whereas men were free to go and attend the trainings, women would still need to take care of the house, make sure everybody has left the house, take care of, some of them had little babies, that take care of their little babies, then prepare themselves, then they'll start coming to the training. So they were always late. So the project had to and they were late, they were performing poorly in the assessments that had to, because they were not learning as much as the male folk. So who is going to go back and deliver the training? Let's just be practical. You are a program implementation team, you paid a consultant to deliver some trainings, people were late for the training. Who is going to go back? Where are you going to get the money from to deliver training again? So, but the project was kind enough to readjust the timing so that the females on the project could match, could meet up, could have a suitable time that they could meet up to. And it made the project to be more effective. So eventually they saw an improved performance in the post-test scores of the female beneficiaries of that project. So that's an example of how considerations for gender can help the project to be more effective. Another way that gender perspectives, putting them in the evaluation evaluation work we do, can be beneficial is that we're providing the right recommendations for policy and program improvement. Like I said, the MEL team, we shine the torch on the dark areas, we make recommendations, we help our teams to get better. Or when we are not looking at gender sensitive evaluations, we'll be giving blanket recommendations. When you look at the gaps where it affects the different genders, you can provide very nuanced insights that help with better policy making and even helps with program redesign, like the example that I just gave. And overall, there will be more effective interventions, and we'll know that the resource that we allocate to our programs are well utilized. Okay. The final one is in stakeholder engagement. So we must make sure that we're hearing from everybody. I've given the example of the community that had the borehole. I know I've used that before for this team, so I won't go over it again. But imagine that they had really done a proper needs assessment for the different genders. They would have identified that the women in that community liked, in accessing water, they saw it as a leisurely activity, and they would gossip, they would catch up with each other, they would be out of their homes and taking a break in fetching water. So in how they designed the intervention for that community to access water, they would have made sure that they considered that, is it social aspect of not having water, and they would have provided an intervention that addresses it. So for that particular mishap that happened, they could have still sunk those boreholes in the center of town, but what they needed to do was to provide an alternative social gathering for the women that took them away from their homes, gave them that break from the routine of being at home, and also allowed them to catch up for themselves. So engaging with stakeholders is very, very, very important, and making sure that we pull in all the right perspectives as we develop our evaluation approaches. There's no way that we can minimize the effect of gender equality in getting the right perspectives. So yeah, let's look at gender-related indicators. A lot of the time I get this question: what indicators can we use for this project that we're working on that has to do with gender? So while gender disaggregation is not an indicator, I've put it in. I've put it in. Gender disaggregation, like I said, at the very basic, make sure every indicator you have, you're disaggregating the data as much as possible, so that you understand if the different genders are experiencing things differently in the intervention that you're providing. And you will know, like, oh, this impact for the male folk is different from the impact for the female folk, and we can address it in XYZ ways. Or, oh, our project is really making sure that we're seeing the same kind of impact in both genders. Let's keep doing what we're doing. So regardless of whether you have gender-focused indicators or not, at the very least, every data set you collect, see how male and female are performing. And if possible, also look at age, but age is not the focus of our discussion today. Now, when we look at the different types of indicators we could use for our programming, how can we measure? One thing we can measure is access. So if you're on a project that is bringing in resources or services to your community, you want to see access. If the female gender is accessing the whatever you're bringing, the intervention, as much as the male gender, or the male gender is accessing it as much as the female gender. So you're doing a health project. I've already spoken that men are more likely to not access healthcare than females. So you want to have a particular maybe indicator that helps you to measure male access for that healthcare service that your project is bringing. And you could also have indicators that help you to identify barriers to access. Okay, so for instance, a lot of the time, some women in really rural settings will prefer to use a traditional birth attendant than to go to the primary healthcare center, whereas the services at the primary healthcare center will be more comprehensive than the services that the traditional birth attendant would provide. So maybe you have an indicator that checks out the number of women who access your healthcare in the health facility as compared to the total population of women who are pregnant in that community. You find out that, oh, access to the healthcare facility is not for all women. You may want to investigate what are the barriers that are keeping women from accessing. You could find out that the influence of mother-in-laws and mothers maybe keeping women. So you may want to develop an indicator that measures giving those mother-in-laws and mothers knowledge that helps them to support their daughters and daughters-in-law better. So you could have that, you have an intervention to help women to access antenatal care. You could also have some sort of communal mentoring that happens for the older ladies so that they are placed in the right position to support those younger women to access the healthcare, and they don't serve as a barrier to the women. So you are not looking at the access of the gender, but you're looking at the barrier that is keeping the gender from accessing the services or the opportunities that you're bringing. So one kind of way you can measure progress on your project, access indicators. Another one is representation indicators. And representation is, are women as present as men? Are men as present as women? Is the voice of the man heard as much as the voice of the woman is heard? So you want to make sure that there's that balanced perspective. I think I gave the example of a creative project where maybe women, you're using creativity, maybe artists, women do not have as much voice as the men do in the art space. So you want to have a project that ensures representation, that the perspective of the women and the men are present in your project. So representation, who has voice, who is present, who can use a platform, you want to check that. And when you look at governance projects, decision-making projects, or projects that focus on leadership, you want to make sure that the perspectives of both genders are considered and there's representation of both genders in your project, because the decisions that are made by leaders affects everyone in that society that you're working in. So if you have not considered that both genders be represented, the subset of the population whose lifestyle or whose participation in society will be affected by the decision made would not have some sort of consideration because there has been no representation of their gender in the decision-making process. Okay. Another one is participation indicators. So are people participating as they ought to? If not, is their lack of participation due to their gender? I gave the example of participation in a training. So yeah, the indicators around participation help us to make sure that all genders have a voice. So it also helps us to make sure that we're seeing where someone is underrepresented, not someone, where a gender is underrepresented, and that we're promoting social justice and making sure that there's equitable decision making, equitable practices in our society. So as a male practitioner, someone has asked you to go and develop a set of indicators and to include something that has to do with gender. So these are the things that you can do. Number one, as long as it's a quantitative indicator and the population is male and female, disaggregate your data. Look at access, look at representation, and look at participation. Indicators that you can build around those. So I hope those have been helpful. Where I have used this, I found out that we have really good insights on how the project performs, and our reports are not boring. You can delve into a particular situation and provide really nuanced information on how a particular gender is doing. Okay. Now, when you're looking at your MEL, you're developing a MEL framework, what should you consider? So when it comes to gender, in your design phase, we are not gender experts, okay? I like to remind myself, I know a bit about gender because I've worked with gender experts for a long time, and of course their knowledge has rubbed off on me, but male professionals are not gender experts. So when you want to design an evaluation or a monitoring approach, please go back to their frameworks. Just as we have different kinds of monitoring frameworks, in the gender sphere, they have different types of framework that they can use to understand gender better. So make sure that you are contextualizing your evaluation design on some existing framework for gender. So it helps you to make sure that you are assessing the gender really well. And you are also able to be very direct in providing insights on how gender dynamics affects your program and the outcomes that you want to see, or affects the participation, the experience of people that are on your program. So always rely on different kinds. There are so many different gender frameworks. So go back to them. You want to look for indicators that have to do with access, representation, or participation. Look at gender frameworks. By the time you look at them, you'll be able to coin your indicators and design your evaluation frameworks really well. Another thing you want to do at the design stage is to involve stakeholders from both genders in design. Sometimes you would have the evaluation space is male dominated. I think we all know that. Sometimes you have only male perspectives in the design of an evaluation. And I'm really grateful. A very, very long time ago, I don't want to mention names, but an organization, I was working with them, and we're looking at a data collection tool. It was for an education project. We're looking at a data collection tool, and the team lead for the evaluation work, we're looking at the questions, the suitability of the questions and appropriateness of the questions to answer our evaluation objectives, or to provide insight to our evaluation objectives. And we're all around the table, a lot of us, almost a team of 12. And the team lead now asks that he wants to understand if the questions are appropriate for girls. And I was like, wow, this guy, look at what you're considering. So we not only had to look at, are these appropriate for the age, are these appropriate for the educational level, we also had to look at, are the questions appropriate for the gender? And it made us to look at other things that a particular gender experiences, which we hadn't thought of, but which would influence our evaluation objectives. And so we had to reward some questions and add other questions to make sure that we were interrogating the beneficiaries of the project really well, and to understand how the project had affected them in their own particular gender. So it's really, really important. I think for that project, one of the things that we looked at was access to education when physiological changes happen. So for instance, a girl's first period, or how she manages herself in class when she's having her period, access to bathroom facilities in the school, the wearing part of the initial design. But we realized that asking those questions helped us to get better insights on our evaluation objectives, part of which was access to education in the communities that we're visiting. So bringing in the perspective of both genders when you're designing your evaluation is very, very important. And when you're also designing how you're going to implement your evaluation, you can't like I said, making sure that you have the appropriate questions. Also, another one is making sure that the language is sensitive. That, for instance, if you have questions, it's not just he, him. Questions don't only refer to the male gender, but questions may refer to male and female gender. So there's sort of a balance in how the questions appear to the person who is going to answer them. It's also important to consider, when you're collecting data, any ethical considerations that you must make because you're working with a particular gender. Any necessary approvals that you must have in place before you go to the field. Okay, very, 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 very important for you to consider that. I've gone to the field. I think I don't want to call any particular state, but a team of mine went to collect data, and they were supposed to do house-to-house visits. And they were in a state where women are secluded, or they were in a community where women are secluded, and males, except for family members, are not allowed to go into spaces where women are. And the team lead for that particular data collection team, he had only males on his team. So they traveled to this community, found out this situation, and they had to travel back. The whole day was wasted without data collection. They then had to go back, get some females from other teams, exchange some of the males in their teams with females, and then travel back again with those females and conduct their interviews and leave. So having an understanding of what ethical considerations should be made, what approvals should be sought because of gender norms is very, very important if you're an evaluator. Have all that done at the design stage before you even go to field to reduce the challenges that you'll face in the field. And providing the right training to your team is extremely, extremely important. You must provide the right training to your team. Train your field teams on gender-sensitive methodologies for asking questions to enhance their ability to perform well in the field. I see time has really gone, so let's move on. Now we're looking at gender considerations, yeah, for data collection. And I've mentioned before, I won't speak too much about it, participatory approaches. You must be thinking of how to make sure that you're bringing in diverse perspectives. You want to conduct a qualitative session, make sure you're looking at female perspectives, male perspectives. You want to put out a survey, make sure that there's a balance in the population that you address the survey to. And then make sure that you're sensitive to gender roles in how you interact with people on the field. Again, present insights that highlight what a particular gender is experiencing. So if there are any challenges that a particular gender is experiencing, highlight it. If there are any particular success stories that a particular gender is if there are any success stories that a particular gender is experiencing, also highlight it, because that is what makes your work to be more robust and insightful. Okay, so we've come to the end. It's been, sorry, excuse me, it's been a long, I know that we had said that we're going to take our time, but this has been quite a long presentation, and I hope it has been beneficial. But the final thing I'm going to say is talking about engaging stakeholders. Please include, when you're doing your needs analysis, ensure that you include a gender analysis. So use those gender frameworks and try to understand the influences of whatever you're looking at in that community, the influences that gender has on that. Make sure that you are defining your goals. You have clear indicators and objectives that track your progress when it relates to your gender outcomes. Make sure that you're doing that. Put in a gender lens when you are doing your monitoring and evaluation. And these are core things that this additional to are for your project teams. Create supportive policies within your team. Support the gender that is disadvantaged. It depends, whatever team you are in, it could be that is the female gender, it's the male gender, whatever, but create supportive policies. Sometimes men need time off to spend with new families, but they don't get paternal leave. So you as a team leader, how are you helping the men on your team? And never stop building the capacity of your team to be good professionals. So this aspect of gender equality, make sure that you're bringing it through in your team. I know that some people celebrated International Women's Day today at work. Some people will celebrate it on Monday. But regardless of when you're celebrating it, please include some capacity building around equality and the rights of women and making sure that women are empowered. So yeah, those are my final words. And I hope that summarizes all the discussions that we have had today, quite lengthy, I must say, on gender equality and monitoring, evaluation, and learning, including gender equality and programming. So yeah, do I have any questions? Any questions for me? Oh, thank you. Thank you for the nice feedback. Thank you so much for the nice feedback. Okay. There's a question that says, can you speak about the intersectionality between gender and other social categories? Okay. Okay. Now, when we say intersectionality and gender, we're looking at other cross-cutting themes that may affect whatever we're investigating as monitoring and evaluation professional. So we may be investigating health. We may be working on a project that has to do with health. We're developing an evaluation approach to the health work that we're doing. When we look at intersectionality, we're saying, how does gender intersect with age in people that are accessing healthcare? So we may look at male and the different male ages and how they're accessing healthcare. Female and the different female age groups and how they're accessing healthcare. Another cross-cutting theme could be ethnicity or religion and how that affects a particular gender and whatever phenomena you're studying. Same thing, socio-economic status. How does that affect a particular gender and the matter that you're studying? And of course, we know that, again, not to go too technical, but we know that there are tests that you can use when you're considering multiple variables. Do we need to go into statistics right now? But I'm sure those that don't know, yeah. But that's that when we say intersectionality and gender, that usually is what we are speaking about. Okay, I can see comments around. We found this really beneficial. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm happy to be of help in helping you understand gender and how it fits within monitoring, evaluation, and learning. We've gone over the 1 hour. I know that we're expected to go over the 1 hour, but I'm trying to be very cautious. I'm trying to. There's a weird question. Why are most gender programs focused on women? Again, like I said, when we're talking about disparities, a lot of the social norms, sorry, excuse me, a lot of the social norms that influence gender cause disparities more often for the female population, because we've moved from a society where those gender or social norms actually protected women, because women were more cloistered, women were considered to be less powerful because of the way society was. And we've moved from those kind of societies to societies where women are required almost to go out and to be less cloistered, to be more proactive. So we can't use the same social standards that we used 50 years, 100 years ago now. And so social development programs are trying to correct that. So the imbalances that have happened because of these disparities, social development programs are trying to correct those imbalances. And that is why it would seem as though most interventions that they say gender are focused on women. It's because the women folk already have like they're coming to the playing ground already disadvantaged. So there are a lot of interventions to address them. But I feel like even in addressing challenges that women face, it's good to always have interventions within those programs that look at the male folk and look at the male folk and how they can help to limit those barriers that the women are facing. And maybe not the male folk, it could be other people within society, it could be community leaders and how they support women. It could be older women and how they support the younger women. So, yeah. Okay, so there's a question around, we faced a challenge in incorporating gender perspectives into our evaluation because we do not have gender-specific data for our baseline. How can we overcome this? Oh, that is a good one. So maybe you've done a needs assessment or a baseline and you're looking at, you want to get information that is specific to women, you know, those indicators that I mentioned before, and you are not, the information is not held anywhere. Then you may need to be the one that creates that information. So a lot of the time, some people would use general data on that relate to a particular gender. But where you don't have that, in the community where you're working, you would need to go and look for that baseline information that you are looking for and count your indicators in a way that you can get the data. So ask questions in a way that is acceptable for the community to provide the answers you want. So if you're asking questions and you're not getting the answers, you may not be asking the questions right. That's if you're doing primary data collection. And if you're relying on secondary data collection, we've evolved in our data collection processes as a country, but if you're using secondary data, maybe data from the statistics team, or some standardized surveys, and you don't have gender disaggregated information or particular indicators, then you have to go and collect that yourself and make sure that you're asking the questions in a way that can elicit the responses that you need to get. Okay. To look for. I'm trying to sift between. I like the comments, but I can't read comments. I want to focus on questions. Trying to sift between the comments and the questions. So, how do you do gender disaggregation? Oh, that's very easy. That's a nice one. Okay, maybe I assumed that everybody knew that. I apologize. When we say gender disaggregated data, it means that we collect data from a population. Everybody in the population, be you male, be you female, whatever your gender is, we're collecting information from you. And we're collecting the information in such a way that we can identify your gender. So if, for instance, I have a questionnaire, one of the questions in my questionnaire will be your sex. So we can identify male and female. And then every other question is the same. But I have a question that is saying sex. And you that is completing my questionnaire, you need to indicate whether you're male or you're female. Now, we finished collecting all the data, we're done with field work, and we're cleaning the data, and we've run our analysis. We run our analysis, we look at what the general population is saying. So in this population, let's say we interviewed 300 people, just random figure. We find out that 70% of the people in that population pick maybe a particular data point. That's the people that respond yes. We can now decide that we want to look at for that data point, aside from that general population figure, what is the percentage of men or males who responded yes to that question? And then what is the proportion of females in that larger community who answered yes to that question? So what we're going to have is, for the general population, this is the proportion that answered yes, 70%. Then we'll now say, within the male population, this is the proportion that answered yes. And within the female population, this is the proportion that answered yes. So when we look at that 70% and we break it across male and female, what we have done is we've disaggregated the data. So we'll now have gender we've disaggregated the data, and we've disaggregated the data based on gender. We've broken down the data based on gender, and we now have gender disaggregated data. So I hope that's clear. We look at a data set, we say what is the total, and then we say what is the proportion of male and what is the proportion of female. Okay, so that's what we mean by gender disaggregated data. Sorry that I didn't explain that. I just assumed. Sorry, that was a really wrong assumption, especially because some of the people, this is the cohort for comms, so some of the people in the team would not be male savvy. Sorry about that. What practice can enhance gender equality in our project work? What do you mean by that? I'm not sure. What practice can enhance gender equality? So that's the essence of everything we've discussed. Like, the whole thing is thinking through from ab initio, understanding that there's value in making sure our projects have some consideration for gender, that our projects are not gender unaware. that we have some consideration for gender is very, very important. That's the first thing. And what can enhance, I'm trying to look at the question. If we follow through on the whole thing, first of all, that consideration, then, okay, maybe I'll say consistently conducting gender analysis. So you're doing your needs assessment, make sure you're considering gender. You're doing your baseline, make sure you're considering gender. You're going for monitoring activities, make sure you're considering gender. And make sure that you're bringing the insight from all these assessments that you're doing, you're bringing that insight back to the project team so that they can improve and make the project more effective. So for me, I think that's a practice. Like, don't say my project is not gender transformative. I would do anything that does not relate to gender. I hope that addresses your question, but if it doesn't, please ask the question right back and I will try to attempt it again. There's something there on intersectionality. Okay. Okay, you like how I've explained it. Okay, yeah. A lot of us will call that cross-cutting themes and the influence of cross-cutting themes on each other. So that's what we mean by intersectionality. Thank you. Explain gender mainstreaming again. Okay. So I think the easiest way to explain gender mainstreaming is to say the implications of gender in policies or processes. You understand? So you are doing a policy, you have a policy that you want to roll out. What is the implication of that policy on gender? Okay, that's gender mainstreaming. And how do you now address it? What do you put in place to address that implication, if any, if there's any, if you find out that there's any, what do you do to address it? Or maybe a process, or maybe a program. You just want to say, how will this affect the gender? What implication will it have on a gender? And what are we going to do to address it? So you're considering, you're bringing the focus of that thing, you're bringing gender into it. Okay, I think that's in simple terms. That's what I understand by gender mainstream. If there are any gender experts, please put in your questions. Okay, I don't think we have any more questions. It's mainly comments. It's mainly comments. And thank you everyone for your kind words. Thank you so much. So yeah, that's everything. I think this is my last slide. Thank you very much for participating, for joining us today. And thank you also for your work that you're doing on the course. If you have any challenges whatsoever, please reach out to me and I will follow up with a response, because we really want to make sure that the course that we're doing is well designed. So yeah, thank you for supporting us with the pilot and give us any feedback that you have. Also, thank you for joining this session today. It's been a very interesting one to just go over all these things. Some of us already know it, so it's a reminder for some people. And for those who are new, it's good to know that we're helping you to strengthen your capacity in the social development space. If you have any questions whatsoever, please send them to me via my email and then I'll be happy to respond. I'm thinking that I'm going to do a quiz. You know, I said I'm going to have a recording for this. I think I'm going to do a quiz for this. Maybe I don't know that I will, but maybe I will do a quiz and send that out when I'm sending the video, just to see, because this is less webinar style and it's very deep. So just to see what people remember from the session. Let's see. Should we try it? Thumbs up if you think we should try it. The thumbs up are not very many. Okay, we'll see. Oh, so okay, maybe there's a delay with the internet. I'm seeing more thumbs. Okay, anyhow, thank you very much everyone for joining us this evening with this session to go over gender equality and monitoring, evaluation and learning. I'll drop off now and I wish everyone a lovely weekend. And as you celebrate International Women's Day, don't forget that the goal, the focus is for us to support women and girls to have rights, equality, and empowerment. Yeah. Have a lovely, lovely weekend, everyone. Bye.